everyone, Larry here from the Retro Gamers Podcast here at finally New York Comic Con 2018. And before I get into everybody's way, I figured introduce this week. We're doing a little half and half. This week, let me back out here. There we go, a little easier to see. This week, we're kind of splitting it up. I got dibs up first here, again, at the Jacob Javits Center, New York Comic Con 2018. I'm here on my own, so I'm going to try and wing this as best as I possibly can. Hopefully you'll be able to hear me, and we're basically just going to take in the sights and sounds of New York Comic Con. So this probably more will be the YouTube aspect of it, but if we just start walking, and I'm going to flip the camera here in a moment, and you're going to see some amazing cosplay right off the bat. So let's get right into it. Alright, so I just played one of the arcade 1-up machines very briefly. Like I said, I'm kind of doing this on my own, so I got no one to hold the camera to show otherwise. The arcades played awesome. They played smoothly. They ran smoothly. I was playing Centipede. Those systems, they're not as short as I kind of thought they were going to be. I mean, they're smaller than regular arcades, but it didn't, they were on the platform, which made it feel like a normal size arcade. So that's going to work out perfectly. Looks like they're on sale mid-October, so get your pre-orders in if you haven't already, and I'm going to continue the floor. Alright, so hopefully all the editing was done properly. Hopefully Anthony did a good job with piecing everything I taped here at New York Comic Con 2018 here at the Javits Center in New York City. As I actually have to get ready. Oh, look at this. That is fantastic. It's from Mario Odyssey. That's awesome. Alright. Yep. Anyway. After this, I got to head to the Barclays for hockey, so I'm really tired, but I ran into someone special, someone from my past who actually had to put up with a lot of the games I play now when they originally came out. And if you will, ladies and gentlemen, this is my college roommate, Eric. Am I allowed to use your last name? You want to keep it hidden?
All
right, fair enough. So Eric, thank you for actually being on the Retro Gamers Podcast and kind of closing up the New York Comic Con edition.
Okay, well, it's nice to meet both of Larry's viewers.
My mother and me. So, here at Comic Con, did you run into anything? Did you see anything pretty cool? Whether cosplay or even just cosplay.
Yeah,
first.
a lot of great cosplay, a lot of original cosplay. Stuff I wouldn't think of. I saw somebody dressed like Ed Norton from the Honeymooners.
That I wish I saw. That's cool.
And he had the Captain.
Captain Video.
Captain Video.
Captain Video.
Captain Video. And so I thought that was really great. He wasn't wearing the helmet; he was holding it.
Of course. Best part of that episode, though, is when Ralph pops open the chips, but he broke it too much, and he's trying to play it off because it was live back in the 40s or 50s. That's cool. I wish I ran into that one. Stuff-wise, merch or whatever. Have you seen anything kind of cool? Anything interesting, merchandise-wise?
I mean, there's a lot of good stuff. I just saw. What was it with the wood carvings?
Yes. Yeah. I'm gonna go back, and this will be out of order. So, yes, there's a really cool wood carvings. I have. Here we go. Spitfire Labs. Instagram, Spitfire Labs. So definitely check them out. That was really cool.
So that looked very interesting, very detailed work. I was very impressed with that. Just a lot of great art on Artist Alley. And another great year at Comic Con. Everything was, seems very great.
How many years have you been here?
Let's see. I first started going 2010. An old college buddy of ours, Byers and mine, actually.
Oh yeah.
Got me into going here. So I've been going every year since. Although I missed 1 year. Back was it 2012, 2013.
Okay.
And then
2012 was a little rough. Oh no, this was before all that happened in 2012.
So
hurricane. So.
Yeah, so that might have been that year, but so there was 1 year I missed it, but aside from that 1 year, I've been going ever since.
Okay.
And it's great. I run into people I haven't seen in a long time.
Like yours truly.
What's his name over here?
Yours truly.
An old high school buddy I reconnected with because of Comic Con. So
I actually had another college roommate here, but I think he forgot who I am because he actually is like an executive producer for Marvel.
Oh wow!
Like the website. So I think I run into him here. I've run into him at Mania, I think he just thinks I'm some sort of weird fan, but we ruined for a year and a half.
Oh.
But he was the last roommate, and he was the one that had to put up with me during the GameCube era.
He was my first roommate, and also the best of all three of my roommates.
Actually,
although to be fair, they kind of set the bar pretty low. So.
No, we had a good time actually.
Oh yeah, no,
we had a really good time. WrestleMania.
Yeah,
I dragged you out.
No,
12 hours.
Yeah, you got to meet Maven's mother.
Oh my God, remember that? That's right. So some crazy. Now this is WrestleMania 17.
Me and another friend of ours actually walked away to get something to eat, so we weren't there for this. We only heard about it when we came back.
Oh, that's right. It was you and Yari.
Yeah,
I think,
me and Yari.
Yes.
We walked away to get something to eat or drink or something. And
because I made them come with me 12 hours before the show started. We had preset seats.
As Chris Jericho.
I was.
He had the belts and everything.
And someone wanted to take a picture with the belts. And on a New York City street, I don't think so. But while we were waiting online, some crazy woman came up screaming. Again, this was WrestleMania 17, so it was 2001. No, WrestleMania 18.
2002.
It was 2002, WrestleMania 18, because it was Rock and Hogan.
Yeah, I remember that.
And
I was the only one. Me and Yari were the only ones cheering for The Rock, and I went first.
And this woman was screaming, my son! I'm like, what are you talking about? Maven, my son! This woman looked nothing like Maven. Maven looked nothing like this woman. And it was very funny. Very funny. That was a good time. Otherwise,
and we got to see the Big Show in person. The man's hands are bigger than my head.
He's a big dude. I actually showed the clip a few times with him at what is now the Hard Rock in Times Square. But now that was a good time.
Yeah, good buffet.
Yes. Oh yeah, right. Oh my God, amazing. So, but we're gonna wrap this portion up, like I said, of the podcast. I'm happy to run into you. I mean, we're going to do a little bit more walking around.
Yeah.
And but I'm happy to have you actually on the show, and hopefully maybe one day in the future actually have you on for like a full episode.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind that. Although I'm not a video game expert, more than happy to give my 2 cents.
Fair enough. Hey,
which is what the internet's all about.
Speed racer. This is true. If the internet's anything, it's for them to tell me how much they hate me in my YouTube videos. My YouTube videos, not the Retro Gamers videos. So, all right. So at this point, at some point, we're going to throw it over to Anthony, who actually has a special guest this week, the host of the Yin and the Yang podcast, Anthony Chu, is filling in for me for the second half, or second 2/3 of the Retro Gamers podcast from New York Comic Con 2018 at the Jacob Javits Center in New York City. Eric and Larry saying so long from New York. See you next year in 2019. Yep. Anthony Rippo, take it away.
All right, thanks, Larry. It looks like you're having a really good time there at New York Comic Con, and thanks for the report and sharing those videos. As you can see, I have Anthony Chu from the Yin and the Yang podcast with me. We'll talk about him in a minute, but right now, I wanted to get to this week's Wacky retro game. And Anthony, I thought this would be an interesting one to talk about because this week's Wacky retro game is actually an arcade game. And I thought that would be a good one to talk about because, as everybody is going to see or hear, we're going to be talking about arcade games in our next segment. But I wanted to cover one really weird wacky retro game, and this game is actually called Poolarula. And I don't know how to pronounce that correctly, but it's
Poolarula.
Yeah, it's it's Poolirula, it's like Pulirula. Poolirula. It was developed by Namco in 1991, and it was and it was a standard beat 'em up game. However, the idea behind it was about a bad man who stole a time key to stop time flow, and you play one of two characters that have to stop him. Sounds like a standard game, nothing crazy. But then when you look at some of the levels that you're walking through, they're a little bit strange. So, Ant, I know I'm showing you an image on the screen, and I'll pop it up here right there.
Okay.
So, on one of the levels, you have these weird pink elephant characters coming out of a doorway with these two giant legs sticking out of these other doorways.
Yeah, I was about to say, legs.
Yeah. So I don't know exactly what that has to do with stealing time. But this was only in the Japanese version. When they ported this to America, they did not put this image in there. However, there are other images from the game that are equally disturbing. For example, this one that I'm showing right now, where you're standing in front of a mountain and there's a giant sumo wrestler behind you, but he's showing you his backside. So you're practically getting mooned by a sumo wrestler. And then here's another image of walking through a level where there's a giant face licking the screen, basically. So yeah, so I don't know what Namco was thinking of when they decided to make this game, but to me, it's just really weird, really trippy. There were definitely a lot of drugs going on when they came up with this one. So again, if you want more information on this, feel free to look it up online. But Pulirula is this week's Wacky Retro Game.
Cool.
All right, everybody. Now to do a proper introduction for my co-host, since my usual co-host Larry is obviously over at New York Comic Con this week, as you saw in our first segment. So I would like to introduce the host, or the main host of the Yin and the Yang podcast, which is part of the More of the Same network, and obviously a really close friend of mine. We've been friends for over 30 years. So please welcome to the show, Anthony Chu.
Hey, everybody. How are you? I just want to say thank you so much for having me on the show, because I've never done a show with video before. Larry doesn't do that for my show. So it's very interesting, because since I've never done this before, I didn't know what to expect, and I think this is pretty awesome. So you guys have an amazing show put together. I listen to it myself every single week because I am a video gamer myself as well. So it's a great opportunity and pleasure to be here. So we have an awesome topic for you this week.
Yeah, and actually a topic that you came up with too, because when we were prepping for the show and we were discussing what you wanted to talk about. I actually thought, this is episode 109. We've done 109 episodes, so it's like, how do you keep coming up with new content? And a lot of the times it is from what other people talk about. They're like, hey, you know what? You guys haven't talked about this yet, or whatever. And you came up with a really interesting topic that we definitely want to talk about. And I'm sure Larry's going to be jealous that he's not on this portion of the show. Since he's too busy on the Comic-Con floor. Well, too bad for him.
Well, while Larry's doing the Kermit the Frog reporter type thing over there,
Larry T. Mormon here.
I mean, I came up with the idea simply because I saw on social media there was an article that asked whatever happened to all the video arcades. And what's interesting about that is that I have been to one a couple of years back, which was of all places in Hampton Beach, New Hampshire. So they had an entire massive arcade that had featured somewhere around almost 150 video games.
Oh, wow.
Well, I mean, and they're original that go all the way back to the early 80s. I'm talking about Pole Position, Pac-Man.
Oh, nice.
They even had, I kid you not, they had what was the game called? Pong?
Pong, yeah.
Pong,
yep.
Which was insane. I couldn't believe it. So I read the article and I just said, it's an interesting topic because, especially for a lot of the young folks who listen, they don't, it seems like I can start off by saying, a long time ago in a galaxy far away, there were not, Ataris or Commodore 64s, and we'll get into that in a second.
Yep.
Or, NES, consoles. So what do you do for video gaming? You had to go out of your house. You had to go out and actually play the physical arcades that were either located in stores. In Brooklyn, where we grew up at, it was in pizzerias. It was in a lot of what they called stationary stores and things like that. So,
yep. Stationary stores. Those don't really exist very much anymore, do they?
No, not at all.
Very few.
Like,
I think the pharmacies ate them up.
I think so. Yeah. I really think so, and that's how it evolved. So, absolutely, I think it's a pretty interesting topic to cover. So I figured I pitched it to you, and you liked it. So
no. It's definitely a good topic to cover, and you know what? We don't need to drag it on. But the topic that you came up with was arcade games that were never released on an actual video game console. which is really interesting because these days with the birth of the virtual console on starting mostly with like PS3 and Xbox 360 and Wii, once online capability became a thing and you started to subscribe to these online to these online video game consoles, they started to release virtual versions of video games, and some of them actually arcade games. So it was kind of interesting to go back and find arcade games that were never ever released on consoles at all, because to me, even if it was released virtually, because like games that pop in my head immediately are games like X-Men the arcade game and The Simpsons arcade game, which are two of my favorite arcade games. Now, before the virtual console, never existed on a platform. But thanks to the virtual console, you're able to play those now, which is awesome.
By the way, before you go any further, I just wanted to let you know that I am with you on the same campaign. Speaking of virtual, that VB does suck.
Oh, yes. Well, yes. Larry's not here, so he can't defend it. But I appreciate it.
Which is great.
Yes.
Even better.
I know, exactly. So, so hashtag VB sucks. Everybody knows how much I like to tease Larry on the Virtual Boy, but let's really face it. Let's face facts. The Virtual Boy sucked. There's a reason why it failed. Just a little shout out to Larry. Be like, Larry, you can't defend it this week. Sorry. And plus, there were no arcade games released on the Virtual Boy. There were barely any games released on the Virtual Boy.
That's true. That's true.
But anyway, so I think we can jump right into this. So I think what we're gonna do is Anthony and I came up with. Actually, I just realized we have two Anthonys hosting the show. Kind of a first for the Retro Gamers podcast. But anyway, so what Anthony and I are going to do is we came up with a list of 5 arcade games that were never released to a console. So we're just going to go back and forth and talk about them. Now, it's quite possible we haven't seen each other's list, so it's quite possible we have similar ones, or we may hear 10 unique ones. But we'll see what happens. So, Ant, since you are our guest host today, I will give you the honor of going first.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So this is a lot of research in a sense, because we got to make sure that since there are so many systems out there throughout history in the last, 2-3 decades or so, we had to make sure that these were not ever put, and ported onto a console. So the first one I came up with is actually a really interesting throwback. I'm not a very big fan of fantasy type movies, but there was a movie that was released in 1988. It was a fantasy film by Ron Howard, and the storyline itself was created by George Lucas, creator of Star Wars. And the movie was called Willow.
Yes.
So Willow came out in 1988, and interestingly enough, the video game to it came out in 1989. If you want to talk about retro, that's nearly 30 years ago.
Yeah, we're almost at the 30-year mark for that.
Right, exactly. And the premise of it is that you have to obviously beat certain levels, or at that time, the kids would call it boards, right? Mm-hmm. There were certain boards that you had to go through. And the whole premise is that you had to collect certain items, you had to beat a certain boss. It's like, if you can imagine taking Super Mario and then taking Zelda and putting it together, that's what Willow would have looked like. And it was interesting because I remember back in 1989, I was still in junior high school. You would pass by the video arcades and you would see kids lined up to play the game. The whole thing about it is that the way that people used to back in those days, when they wanted to wait for a game, and depending on how much they wanted to play, they would take their quarters and they would literally put it on the glass of the monitor, so that
I used to do that all the time.
Exactly, and you can gauge and see how many quarters or how long do you think it's going to take for him or her to play. So Willow was one of those great movie, but a forgotten video game, which is to me a kind of a tragedy.
Yeah,
should have released it on at least the NES or something.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring it up. Well, Willow did have a video game. I just don't think it was the same as the arcade game.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
no, it did have a video game. But you make a good point, because like fantasy movies, especially, fantasy movies resonate really well with kids, and Willow was one of those movies.
Right.
So obviously in the 80s, it just made good sense to license that in the game, for a video game or an arcade game. So yeah, that's actually an interesting one. I did not. I'll admit, I didn't realize Willow had an arcade game. I knew it had a video game. I didn't know it had an arcade game.
Oh, so it wasn't a console then?
Well, there was a Willow game on console. I don't know if it was an arcade game. I didn't know there was an arcade game of it. So, I'm assuming the two are different.
Yeah, I remember very clearly in junior high school, I did see the arcade. At least there was an arcade version. Oop. Well.
What?
Sorry.
No.
No, I didn't realize that it was ported into a.
No. Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't know if it was ported into a video game. What I'm saying, it's entirely possible, because you got to remember, with lists like these, it's entirely possible that an arcade, especially when you're licensing a film or something like that, the arcade version and the console version could be two completely different games. They wouldn't necessarily be.
That is true.
Yeah, they wouldn't necessarily be the same game ported. And sometimes when they port a game, an arcade game to a console, because of console limitations, because arcade games, the arcade boards, were able to handle more memory, more more better graphics and things like that. So when they did get ported to a console, they would kind of get downgraded because of the limitations. So there are some games that, and that could be a topic for another time, that were ported to the consoles, and they actually turned out to be bad games, even though they were great in the arcade. A game like Altered Beast is an example of a game that ported really well from arcade to to the Sega Genesis. But then there are other, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but there are other ones. Maybe a good example would be, and this is my only my opinion, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, when they ported when they ported that game to the NES. Now the Super Nintendo and the Genesis one was good, but when they ported it to the NES, I didn't really think it was a good port. But again, the NES was very limited with an arcade game.
And I'm glad you actually read my mind, because I was about to ask, like, could you give the fans some type of an example of a arcade game that had a bad port into a console? The only one I can think of that I was really upset at was Double Dragon. And I know that we've discussed this at one
Double
point.
Dragon is a good example.
Double Dragon, exactly, in the arcade game was glorious.
Yep.
But then all of a sudden, when you put it into the NES console, it was good, but it's like,
it was not. No, it was definitely not good. I honestly, it
was tolerable. Let's put it that way.
It was tolerable enough, because it was it was still it still gave you the feeling that you had the arcade game at home, but it really was a poor port, like you say.
Right.
The sequel, Double Dragon 2, was awesome. They fixed all the issues they had with the first one. But yeah, but that's an excellent example.
I'm playing that on my NES Classic right now.
Ah, very nice. All right, so Willow is your first one, so I'm going to switch over to mine.
Please.
So the first one that I have is actually, now, I was not the biggest fan of shooting games growing up.
Oh, those are fun.
No, I know, but when I say that, I'm talking about console-wise. Like, with the exception of, like, Duck Hunt, I didn't really do a lot. I didn't play a lot of shooting games. The only other one that I remember playing was on my Sega CD, and it was a game called Mad Dog McCree. And it was like, and it was live. It was like live video. It was a live video shooting game.
Wait a minute. Remember, I think that at one point, and not to digress here, fans, but I remember some years back, didn't you come to my house and play Lethal Enforcers?
Yeah, we used to play Lethal Enforcers too. I remember that.
That's a good shooter game, because they actually gave you two guns.
Exactly. But in terms of arcade, like, I really enjoyed playing shooter games in arcade because it looked so good in the arcade. I never felt like those ported perfectly when you brought them home, except maybe House of the Dead on Dreamcast, which I do remember fondly as well. But there was one series in the arcade called Virtual Cop.
Man.
Yeah,
you know how
exactly.
many quarters I spent on that?
Yeah, and I did the same thing, because that game in the arcade was really awesome. And the first two games were actually ported to console, so you can play them. However, there was a third one. There was Virtual Cop 3, which was really, really awesome. And for some odd reason, I don't know if it was because maybe at that point we were moving on to another generation of console. They were leaving the shooters behind. No idea why. And I believe this was a Sega. I noticed a lot of Sega arcade games made the list of arcade games that were never ported. But for some odd reason, Virtual Cop 3, and it could be Sega was going down at the time, but Virtual Cop 3 never made it to a home console. And it's a shame too, because and again, I would love to see it make it even on virtually. I know you can't shoot at your LED or your 4K TVs. That technology doesn't work anymore.
Right.
But I would still love to see Virtual Cop 3 come to a home console.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's an interesting thing because, I mean, that game, I think a lot of the reasons why Virtual Cop 3 didn't make it is simply because it could be political. Like a corporate decision is what I'm saying.
Could be.
As opposed to, I'm just saying that's a theory of mine. But
the big bad man at Sega?
Yeah. Folks up at top maybe said, we don't want to invest in this type of game and we want to move on, like you said. So it could be. You never know. But that was a phenomenal game.
Yes.
Oh,
agreed.
I remember the amount of Virtual Cop. I remember the amount of quarters I spent on that thing. You know?
Yeah, no, definitely. I definitely remember spending a lot of quarters. And not only that, I mean, spending it as an adult because this game came out later. So I think I want to say this was either college or this was definitely college age for me.
Yeah.
So it was awesome.
Definitely.
All right, throwing it back to you.
Okay, so the next game that I have on my list, and this is again based out of a movie, is, I kid you not, Konami in 1990 came out with the video game Aliens. Okay? Not part 1 Alien, but part 2 Aliens. For the life of me, I can't understand why it never showed up on a console, because for a game that was made 28 years ago, if you played it right now, you would have been like, wow, because the graphics were just unbelievable.
Yeah, I do remember the graphics on that being amazing.
And it was an intense game, and I think that also it was a game where you had 2 players at the same time. It was kind of like that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle 1 style where you kept moving to the right. And it was just, you kept shooting aliens. It's just that, but then you know what it is? Every kid that played it in the arcade, I remember, would always say, wait a minute, and this is one thing they got really wrong here, is that in the movie, the mother alien itself was so difficult to beat. I mean, just, Sigourney Weaver and her crew had an impossible time. How is it that all of a sudden now, in the video game, you shoot them with 1 bullet and they're gone?
Well, because it's an arcade game. It's not going to be fun if you have an alien that's impossible to kill the entire time you're playing.
But I always thought that it would be like a boss level or something.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Well, with a game called Aliens, what else are you going to put against people, Besides the aliens.
Ones. Maybe like they morphed into something else, maybe, if you don't get them in time. I don't know.
Maybe. But I will say that.
But
I will say, like, I think one of the reasons why sometimes games like that don't get ported are licensing rights, and when I say that, I mean licensing rights between the video game company and the film studio. Because whenever you port a game or use a film, you have to get the licensing rights, and the licensing rights may have just been too high of a cost for Nintendo or Sega or any other company at the time, because this was actually prime time for any console to pick it up. Because remember, there was the TurboGrafx 16 that was trying to make its place in the market. There was the 3DO. There was the 3DO that was trying to make its place in the market. And then
didn't Neo Geo too?
Yeah, Neo Geo existed existed around this time as well. So, but Neo Geo, I felt like, was kind of in its own little world. Like, they made their own games and that was it. I don't think they really did any third party.
That's okay. That's
yeah.
true.
I don't think they licensed anything. So but the rest. The rest of the companies could have just been, it may have just been too expensive. But yeah, I agree with you. Aliens was a really fun, like, side-scrolling game. Very, like you said, very like Ninja Turtles. Very similar.
Right, very much so.
Super fun.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Definitely. Go ahead, sir.
So moving on to mine. Now this, again, this is it's another shooting game, but it was a very interesting shooting game that I enjoyed because it was again capitalizing on a film franchise, which you've already talked about twice. So I'm gonna cover it one more time. But this game I actually thought, in my opinion, was more entertaining than the movie. Because it was a sequel to probably one of the most well-known franchises at the time in the 90s, and it was the Lost World Jurassic Park. Now,
oh wow, yes.
Now, what I loved about this game was it was the way it was designed. Like, the screen was constantly moving, almost on like an action form. So it's like you would swing, and all of a sudden there were velociraptors coming at you, and then you would jump in the Jeep and drive away, and then the Tyrannosaurus Rex is chasing you, kind of similar to what happened in the first film when they were in the Jeep trying to get away. But the action in it was so on point, and the graphics, it was beautiful, it was fluid. It was just an amazing and to be honest with you, really exciting game, because like when they were coming at you, it gets tense really fast.
Yes, very much so.
And it was just a blast to play. And it was a 2-player game, so you can play with somebody else, which was awesome as well. And yeah, I mean, who didn't love the Jurassic Park franchise in the 90s? I mean, people are falling in love with it now again because of Jurassic World. Okay. But in the 90s, Jurassic Park was huge.
Yeah, I mean, in like 1993 was the first movie.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just something that no one's ever seen before. It was just, how amazing it was. Now, with the Lost World, is it a shooter?
Yes.
Is it a semi-shooter?
No, it's ultimately a shooter. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. Because I remember there was something out. I after the first film, I never really got into the rest of them, so I didn't know how that game came about. Oh, so it is a shooter game. Okay.
Yep, definitely a shooter game.
Wow.
Definitely a fun game. If you've never played it, if you've never seen it, just go on YouTube and check it out. I'm sure there's video of it, but definitely one game I would. Again, the unfortunate thing about shooter games is that bringing them to a console today, it's a lot harder because you can't use a gun. You can't use like a gun. You can't shoot. They'll put maybe a crosshair on the screen, which will kind of simulate the best you can do. But I definitely highly recommend checking that game out if you've never seen it.
Oh, definitely. That sounds. In fact, you know what? Now I want to check it out. Maybe I'll go flip on the YouTube or something like that and see what it looked like.
Nice.
I promise you, for the rest of the list, I have no more film references. Okay?
I cannot promise the same.
Okay, so now I covered a movie, an action movie that basically came onto video games. I want to shift now to something different. I'll shift the paddles a little bit, shall we say, to one of my absolute favorite driving games.
Making a lighting adjustment here. I'm looking awfully pale.
Okay.
There you go. Okay.
There you go, brother.
I got a little color now. I don't look like a vampire.
So, speaking of Sega, in 1998, Sega came out with a game called Daytona 2: Battle on the Edge.
Yes.
Now, if you are a driving fan, like I love driving, like I like driving my car, but I also like racing games because it's one thing that captivates me about racing games is that you don't die, you know, in real life. If you
can't
really
do that in real life. You kind of
exactly.
die if you do that.
Yeah, exactly. Or you have a very high probability of. And the thing about it is that when Daytona came out, it was okay, when it first came out. But Daytona 2, whoever developed this game, actually put amazing graphics. It was so intense. The shifts and the turns were like really sharp, and you were like on the edge. I'm sure.
Hence the title.
Oh yeah, Battle on the Edge, and I am sure that there were a lot of kids who had high blood pressure issues playing this game because it was just intense. It was fast. Now, I will say this, and I'm going to defend the developers here. Because of the intensity of the game, I realize that nowadays you could virtually put any driving game, and I'm sure between Forza Sport, I think, or something like that, or Motorsport, or there's so many games out there that you can do on a driving level. With this one, I think that it would not have been done justice if you ported the game to a console, because you would have literally needed the wheel. I mean, it was one of those massive things where you're sitting down and you're porting. You're sitting down and you're driving, and there's this big wheel. Yeah. It just would not have made sense to put it onto a game console, just because you needed that driving environment.
Well, and you make a good point, because driving arcade games, I feel like part of the overall experience, because you can buy driving wheels for your consoles now for driving games specifically. Right. But I feel like there's something about sitting down in a seat with the driving wheel and the screen in front of you. It feels more immersive in the arcade, and it's just cooler. So I feel like those are the types of games where it's like apples and oranges when it comes to playing it in the arcade and playing it at home.
Definitely. I mean, another classic example of that was Pole Position. When you really think about Pole Position and in the arcade itself, can you really, really play Pole Position the way that they had it in the arcade? And no. Just imagine doing that, without the wheel.
Yeah, no, exactly. You're and you know what? I mean, I had Pole Position on, I don't know if it was on, I think it was on the NES or
I do remember that.
But yes, using a crosshair and using a driving wheel, two totally different experiences.
Exactly.
So yeah, but still, for today's standards, you can very easily release Daytona 2, because driving wheels now for consoles are in abundance. You can just go to the store and buy one.
Yeah.
So you can even buy. There are other ones where you can buy pedals too, if you want to actually do the gas and brake.
Now, Daytona 2. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but Daytona 2 or a version of it never appeared on the Sega Classic, right?
No,
the Genesis Classic, no. Oh,
well, okay. You mean like those flashbacks?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. And not only that, those flashback consoles were poorly constructed. So,
sure. Now, you were saying the gas and the brake. Can they actually have those things?
They've made those before for consoles, where you can actually buy it and plug it in, so you can, use actual gas and brake. So you can basically.
Wow.
Sort of build a little setup at home where where you've got your own little driving simulator.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. That's pretty cool. I did not even, this is going to sound like I'm living on a rock, but I never knew that. No. Yeah, I just knew that they sold a wheel, but I didn't know that they had gas and brake too. That's crazy.
Yeah, no, dude, crawl out from under that rock.
I got to. Definitely.
All right.
Go ahead, my friend.
Moving on. So I think this arcade game, to me, I think this arcade game goes down in the record books for one of why the hell is this one not out on any console ever? It makes, honestly, because it's probably one of the most world-renowned arcade games and one of the most well-known, especially for fans of the film franchise. Again, we're going into the film zone, and this is my last one from film franchise. But whenever you talk about this game, everybody stops and says how awesome it is, and everybody wants it on a home console. And I'm talking about George Lucas's Star Wars Trilogy. Now, if you've never played this game, you are missing out on prime video game awesomeness. You really are. And I urge you to check it out either on YouTube, or if you find an arcade, if there's an arcade near you, I mean, chances are this game still exists in there, because that's how much people love this game. So Star Wars Trilogy is what it's a video game. It's an arcade game based off the original Star Wars trilogy, and you get to choose. You start by choosing which film you want to play in. Do you want to play in, A New Hope? Do you want to play in Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi? And, most of it's in flying simulation, especially for A New Hope. And it's it's gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous to play through. So, like, for example, if you choose A New Hope, you're in an X-wing, and your goal is to destroy the Death Star. So you're flying. It's first-person perspective. You're flying. You're shooting at the TIE fighters. You're going into the tunnel. You're dodging everything to drop that one bomb by the way Luke did, so you can blow up the Death Star. Absolutely, like when you're sitting in that arcade, because it's also it's kind of an enclosed arcade, more enclosed. So you really feel like it's just you playing the game, and there's like nothing else around you.
Right.
So, absolutely beautiful. The graphics are amazing. It's super fluid when you play through it, and it just gives you such a wonderful experience. I can't talk more highly about the Star Wars Trilogy arcade.
What now? Remind the fans. Actually, remind me as well. What year did this come out?
Oh, this one was probably somewhere in the early to mid 90s. I don't remember exactly when it was.
Or was it mid 90s?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's either that or it's somewhere in the 90s. It could have been, some odd reason, 1998 is popping in my head now, but I'm not exactly sure when.
Okay. Not to sound like I'm digressing here, but is there, and I just want to make sure that this is the same game, because I remember there was this one Star Wars game I played. I don't know if it was Star Wars Trilogy, but there was the one where you're sitting in, and there was a point where you're going, straight ahead, and you have to hit the Death Star in a certain point, and then fly out. Is that the same game?
That was part of it, yeah. That was part of it.
Oh, I remember. Of all places I played that thing?
Where?
Remember in Brooklyn, we had in Bay Parkway, again, fans, I didn't mean to digress, but Chuck E. Cheese.
We're getting
the
local.
Original
God, at Caesar's Bay.
At Caesar's Bay.
Yep.
Before Chuck E. Cheese became nationally chained. One of the original Chuck E. Cheese's was located in Brooklyn, New York, and they had a massive, massive arcade. I remember, I think my father was so angry with me because I took my allowance money and I spent it all on that one game. That was
I didn't realize
it's nostalgia.
I didn't realize Chuck E. Cheese was still around when this game came out. I don't remember when.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
It closed up at around like 92, 93.
Oh, did it close that early? I don't remember.
Well, maybe later. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I was gonna say where Chuck E. Cheese stood, there's a Kohl's now. So
yeah,
among other places. But yeah, Star Wars Trilogy definitely one that at some point that has to come to a console. Just has to.
Oh wow, yeah, absolutely. Okay,
right, back to you.
All right, the fourth selection within this entire thing is. Have you ever heard of a game from Sega that was put together in 1999, and it's called Jumbo Safari?
Jumbo Safari. No, I don't know that one. I actually do not know that one.
The best way to describe this game is that let's take a reference of somebody that you and I both love. If Ace Ventura was to have gone ballistic and decided to hurt animals, this is what Jumbo Safari is.
Oh,
so
that's a good visualization.
Okay, so I mean, the best way to describe it is that you're dressed like, first of all, the crocodile hunter, okay? With the hat and the shirt and everything like that. And they give you, so imagine when in Ace Ventura, when nature calls, when you're driving through the safari with the Jeep, right? And it's funny because as you look at this game, what you do is you have a lasso and you're rounding up animals, right?
Okay.
So you're rounding up animals any way possible, and it's a pretty physical game. And you round them up, and you basically bring them in for points. And there's no rhyme, there's no reason, there's no plot line, there's no setting. You just get in that Jeep. It's Ace Ventura gone ballistic, and you just go round up animals in a pretty violent way.
That's when you say violent, though, is it like, are you killing the animals, or are you just collecting them?
You're not killing the animals, but you're collecting them. I mean, this is 1999, so this is before video games got angry. A bit angry in certain cases. Like it ain't Grand Theft Auto.
Okay.
All right, but It is just, the graphics are great, all kidding aside. And what's also interesting about the game is that it's a limitless game. Like, it's not as if there's something to accomplish, like a storyline, and then that's it. You know, you go to the next level or board or whatnot. It's just, you know, when you can't round up, I think that the premise is that when you cannot round up enough animals for points, it's done.
Okay. Sounds like a game I need to check out on again, like online on YouTube or something like that, because it's a game that never caught my eye when I was hitting the arcades, and I wouldn't be surprised if it pops up somewhere in an arcade.
If you go to YouTube and you check out Jumbo Safari, when he's driving and he's rounding up the animals, I just want you to think in your mind a mental visual. Chitty chitty bang bang, chitty chitty bang bang, we love you. And just imagine Ace Ventura singing that. Okay, that's exactly what you should have in your head.
I will try and remember that disturbing image.
And I'm sorry I had to sing it. I don't want to turn into Larry here.
No, yeah, you do know I don't condone Larry singing on my
He's
show.
using my show as a karaoke hour. You know that?
Oh, is he?
Yeah, this has got to stop.
Yeah, not cool at all. All right, so we're gonna jump back to mine, and so this game, it's another licensed game. It's not a movie license though, but it's a comic book license game, and again, due to the popularity of this character today, the fact that this game has not been released on a console also escapes me. And what I'm talking about is SpiderMan the video game, which was an arcade game. It was called SpiderMan the video game, but it was actually only released in the arcade. It was created by Sega. Again, another Sega arcade game. It was released in 1991, and it played very similar to games like Captain America and the Avengers, a little bit like Streets of Rage, or you can even talk like maybe X-Men the arcade, Simpsons. It's games similar to that. And the four characters that you got to choose from when you were playing were Spider-Man, obviously.
Okay.
Black Cat. Hawkeye. Yep. Black Cat. Hawkeye.
Hawkeye. Yeah.
And probably for the first time, or it may have been the first time ever he existed as a playable character in a video game. May have been the only time. I'm not exactly sure. But Namor the Submariner.
Wow.
Yeah, so those were the four characters that you played through the game. And again,
okay.
You had different levels, and at the end of every level, you fought a different boss. And we're talking about classic Spider-Man villains here. We're talking about Kingpin, Venom, Dr. Octopus, Electro, Lizard, Scorpion, Sandman, Green Goblin, Hobgoblin, and then the final boss in the game, Doctor Doom. I mean, there was so much about this game that was awesome. I have no idea why this game never made it to console. Now, there have been plenty of Spider-Man games, going all the way back to the Atari. I mean, I played the original Spider-Man game on the Atari 2600, which was just, a little red and blue stick figure Spider-Man climbing a building to fight the Green Goblin on the top. But yeah, so it boggles my mind why this one's never come to a console. It's such a fun side-scrolling game. It really is. I don't know if have you ever played it? Never.
I've never even heard of it, believe it or not.
Yeah, it's just fantastic. I'm not sure exactly. And the graphics, the graphics of the game were they looked just like the characters in the comic books. So it was one of those games where you were basically getting the chance to embody one of your favorite comic book characters of all time, or four of them, if you happen to be huge Submariner fans.
Yeah.
So
Submariner is one of those characters in Marvel I really find doesn't get enough respect.
Yeah, I mean he's well, he's an interesting character, and in some cases he's been,
I mean, only recently.
Yeah,
is he slowly coming about?
I think he's coming about, but there were times also where he was kind of perceived as a villain for a little while. So
that's true.
Yeah, so
another character that I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say he's just a very complicated character.
Right. Another character that I find in the Marvel universe that needs to get more attention is Gambit.
Let me tell you something. Gambit I can go on record and say that Gambit is my favorite X-Men.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
by far.
Exactly.
I know everybody loves Wolverine, and I don't hate on Wolverine either. I'm a big fan of Wolverine, but there was something about Gambit that I always felt was cooler. He was just always he's just got this like suave, confident persona. Exactly. And let's face it, I would love to be able to just charge something and throw it and watch it explode. just a cool thing. Okay. So anyway, so Spider-Man the video game, check it out if you've never seen it. And back to you for your number 5. And I have a hunch that your 5th game is my 5th game, because neither of us have gone to a certain genre that we're both big fans of, and I know you wouldn't have left this off your list. So let's see what number 5 is.
I'm almost afraid to even mention the 5th one, because I have a feeling that I think that we're going to have the same 5th,
and that's okay.
So I do have a backup, and just in case, okay. And so the 5th one that I have is a game that was released by Technos in 1991.
Yep.
Called WWF WrestleFest.
That is my 5th game.
Oh man.
But that's awesome. Let's talk about it.
Okay, so you and I have always been professional wrestling fans. Mm-hmm. We've gotten the ring ourselves. We've been trained and we love all aspects of WWF. Mm-hmm. We grew up under the WWF era into the WWE era. Now, what's interesting is that all the classic wrestlers, the professional wrestlers of the 80s going into the 90s were there. Like Jake the Snake Roberts, Hulk Hogan, the Legion of Doom, Sergeant Slaughter.
Who were not playable, by the way. Yeah, in WrestleFest, when you played the tag team option, Legion of Doom were the tag team champions, and because of that, you weren't allowed to choose them as playable characters. Right, exactly. So you get to work your way up to facing them, right? Exactly. I believe Mr. Perfect, your man, Mr. Perfect. Mr. Perfect, man, one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. What? Am I missing anybody else? Was Randy Savage in it? No, Savage was not in it. But you are missing Hulk Hogan. You didn't mention, I don't think. No, I did mention Hulk. Oh, you did mention. Sorry, Big Boss Man. The late great Big Boss Man. Yes. Earthquake. He was in it. Earthquake was in it. Wow. Sergeant Slaughter. Yes, Sergeant Slaughter. Right. I believe the $1 Million Man was also in it. That's right. Yes, Ted DiBiase was in it. Yes. Yep. So it was just for a game that let's not forget also Smash and Crush Demolition. Oh, they were in it too? Yep. Oh wow! This is how long I have not even touched or seen this game. No. I was like, and oh man, that was the coolest thing about WrestleFest, because up until that point, wrestling games on the console would only have like 8 guys, 10 guys, or at most 12 guys. Because in '91, again, it was very limited. When Super Nintendo came out, they were able to expand to like 12 wrestlers. And that wasn't until I think like 1993 or 94 when like Royal Rumble and Raw came out. But when you went to play WrestleFest in the arcade, you had like, I don't know, it was like maybe 16 guys or something like that. And again, because it was in the arcade, the graphics were great, the moves were fluid, it was super fun, and of course, one of the best type of matches you can play in a video game was the Royal Rumble option. And for those of you who don't follow wrestling, a Royal Rumble is basically when you have a bunch of guys in the ring and they come in consecutively in intervals until the ring would fill up, and then the way you would win is you had to eliminate everybody else by throwing them over the top rope out of the ring. Until there was only one person left, so it's basically a last man standing in that sense. In the arcade, and again, this was unprecedented at the time for video games. You were able to have 6 guys in the ring at once. That was unheard of back then. Yeah, so it actually felt like the ring was packed with people, and there you are fighting up, 5 other people at the same time trying to eliminate them until you were the last one standing. And you had to go through every character. So it wasn't just the 6 you were playing against. You were playing against the entire roster in the game. And you had to outlast all of them. I burned all my money playing this game. All of my money playing WrestleFest. And it's a crime we haven't seen that on a console.
It's like, what the heck, WWE? Why have we not seen this legendary classic game with legendary wrestlers not on a console? And allow me to ask a second question here. Why was there no WrestleFest 2?
Well, it's funny you should say that, because there was a WrestleFest game released, I want to say 8 or 9 years ago-ish. But it was released on mobile. And it was basically the same WrestleFest concept, but it was with current superstars. So it was like Undertaker, John Cena. I think Triple H was in there. But again, it was only for mobile. It was very limited. They had originally planned for a newer version in like 2012 that was supposed to be on like PlayStation 3 virtual console.
Okay, right.
But it never. I don't think it ever came out. So. So a game like WrestleFest, I don't know if I mean, granted, it would be great if they did an update with today's superstars, but I would love to see the original come to a home console for sure. I mean, it's just a outstanding, super fun game, especially now. And these days, WWE's video games, like the new one that just came out on Friday, October 5th, WWE 2K19, I think it has like 200 superstars in it.
Right.
200.
Virtually, yes.
Yeah. So we're talking about a game from, almost 30 years ago that held like 16, and it was absolutely amazing, and we still talk about it today as one of the best wrestling games ever made.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and also, let me point out one other thing that makes this game absolutely phenomenal. The idea that in console games, okay, when you had any wrestling console games, we can go back to pro wrestling on the NES, we can go back to any game at that time. If you haven't noticed this little unusual detail, is that the characters were like this small.
Yep.
Okay? And then all of a sudden now, WrestleFest comes out in 1991, and they're huge.
Yeah, that's very true.
For its time, it's huge. Yep. It's like when Samsung came out with the Note 1. Nobody's ever seen a 5.3-inch screen phone.
Yep.
Same thing applies to WrestleFest. You had these large characters, the definition of the graphics. You had a crowd that was screaming, right? And like you could see their muscular development,
Yeah,
and
it was just
see a lot of details within the character.
It was super detailed. You for the tag team version, remember the referee? There was a referee in the ring.
Yes, that's right.
I mean,
it was a third man in.
They really captured the essence of it. So, WWE, if you're listening, which you're not, let's bring WrestleFest back to the virtual console. Xbox One, PS Plus, Switch Online. Would love to see that make a comeback, because I guarantee you're leaving money on the table, because there are a lot of hungry wrestling fans out there, and there are a lot of just arcade fans out there that remember this fondly.
You should bring, if the WWE is listening to this, you should bring back WrestleFest like you should bring back WWF wrestling ice cream bars.
Oh, the ice cream bars.
Okay? So
those were awesome. But I think, since that was my 5th game, I believe that completes the list. So if you guys think that we left anything off the list in terms of arcade games that were never released on console, let us know. Shoot us an email. Shoot us a message on our Facebook page. Let us know what games you love playing in the arcade that you wish you had at home on your console.
Absolutely great. Absolutely great.
All right, Ant, it's time for this week's Did You Know? And I'm sure if you listen to the show, our Did You Know segment is basically I'm going to point out something that you may not know about retro gaming history. So
since I'm a history geek, this is one of when I listen to the show, I look forward to this every week. It's one of my favorite segments.
Well, good. I'm glad. So I hope you enjoy this little piece of information. So I'm going to start it with a question. Do you know, Ant, what the world's first video game arcade machine was. And I'm being specific in terms of video game arcade machine.
No, I can't say I do.
Okay. So, a lot of people know that Periscope was the first. It wasn't the first video game. It was the first like arcade style console, but it wasn't an official arcade game. It was created in a different way. I forget the term that they used, but that was in 1966. It was called Periscope. But the world's first actual video game arcade machine came out in 1971, and it was a game called Computer Space. Now, Computer Space is a lot similar to another game that came out 7 years later called Asteroids. So if you know the game...
Oh, no way.
Yeah. So if you know the game Asteroids, it's kind of similar to that. So basically, you control a ship, and there were a pair of buttons on the console that rotated the ship in one direction or the other. And the cabinet itself was like a really brightly colored cabinets. There was like red, yellow, there may have been a blue one, and then there was a green one. These were released in Japan. The green one was actually really special because the green one had joysticks on it, which were the first time ever, you had joysticks on these cabinets. But they never made that green version for the arcade. It actually wound up being a prototype that never wound up getting mass produced. But Computer Space was the first mass produced video game arcade machine. It was created by Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney. If you don't know who those two people are, they went on to start a little company known as Atari.
Oh, no way.
And a year
wow.
And a year after this game came out, they developed Pong.
Classic.
So the interesting thing about about Computer Space was that in the actual arcade machine, there was no RAM processor, there was no ROM. Because ROM chips were so expensive in the 70s. They're not expensive anymore, but in the 70s they were super expensive. So what Nolan Bushnell did was he substituted in diodes on the circuit board and laid out in the shape of the spaceship. So on the actual circuit board, you had the spaceship design so that you can, so that it would show up on the screen. So it's really interesting how they did that. The highest possible score you can get in this game was only 15. Once you reached a high score of 15, the game would reset because that was as high as the circuit board could allow in the game itself.
Wow.
So now we're talking a game that came out 47 years ago, right? This game is 47 years old. If you want more information on it, check it out. I'll throw some stuff up on Facebook so you can read up on it. But Computer Space in 1971 was the world's first video game arcade machine, and that is this week's Did You Know? So another week has come and gone, and we are at the end of this episode. And this has been a really interesting episode because we started it off at New York City Comic-Con with Larry, and then we moved on into the studio with me and my man Ant here. And Ant, I can't thank you enough for stepping in and hosting with me this week, especially because I thought the topic was awesome. It was definitely something new. Always fun to go down memory lane with you since, we have history, man.
Yeah, but pleasure was all mine. I'm very humbled to be here. It's a phenomenal show, and I got to say to you, it's a very humble experience because when I'm here, it speaks about a topic, that I love. I love retro gaming, and I'm sure that the fans do too. And we always say pass it forward. Now my nephew and my nieces are playing retro video games now.
Nice.
So they're getting into it as well.
Starting
and
young.
By the way, my niece Tiffany does listen to your show.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so she really and she's in Rutgers University. So she has.
Well, hello, Tiffany. Hope all is going well at Rutgers.
And she's when she listens to the show every week, She also has a bunch of girlfriends who listen to the show as well. So, they listen to it all together. So it's pretty awesome, man. Very cool.
Very cool. And yeah, just, I know you're guest hosting on our podcast, and I talked about earlier that you have your own podcast. So why don't you just tell our listeners a little bit something about that?
Okay, very easy. So the Yin and the Yang podcast is mainly about martial arts, and we dive into many different specific topics. We talk about mixed martial arts, traditional martial arts. We also include, and they go hand in hand, health, fitness, motivation. Just to give you an example, we give one segment called Reclaiming You, which is for people who are off track and they want to meet their goals, or they want to meet a goal. And I give them advice and ideas of how to get there, So in the very beginning, on episode 41, for example, we start building a foundation. Then we start setting up little goals, what I call little success, and we build you up. We also talk about anything that's happening in the mixed martial arts world. I also track my own progress, which I talk a lot, because in about 4 weeks from now, I'm running a 5K, and I'm also doing a martial arts competition.
Nice.
So I've been training for that.
Very nice.
So before this guy gets too old, I want to be able to compete at least one more time.
Awesome.
So that's what we do. It drops every Friday.
Okay.
On the More of the Same Network family of podcasts. So I really appreciate you giving me the time to talk about my program.
No, it's no problem. And may I say that as a listener of the Yin and the Yang podcast, I am a big fan. And I really feel like it even with somebody like me, sometimes I have a lot of motivational issues when it comes to my health and things like that. Granted, I'm a very active person. Mm-hmm. But every once in a while you get stuck in that rut, you get seeds of doubt and stuff like that. And I will say you do a really good job at trying to help people get through those moments, because those are really tough moments to get through. So I congratulate you on that. And
thank you. Thank you so
anybody
much.
Listening to the Retro Gamers podcast, I highly recommend giving Anthony a listen over at the Yin and the Yang podcast. So where can they find your podcast?
So the podcast can be found practically everywhere. Our home base is Spreaker. If you just type in the Yin and the Yang. We also are on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Podcast Addict, YouTube. I mean, we release an episode every Friday. So we're now up to episode 51 this week.
Nice.
So we're getting there.
I'm a little behind, but I'm catching
over
up.
A year.
Yeah, you're at that year mark, man. 52.
Yep.
52.
So,
celebrating that year. Well, congratulations. Congratulations on a year of successful podcasting.
Thanks so much.
And again, we're all part of the More of the Same network, so which is a great thing. For those of you out there, for the retro gamers, you can listen to us on Spreaker, iHeartRadio. We're on iTunes, Amazon Alexa, Spotify. Obviously, now if you're watching us on YouTube, so we have presence there. You can find us on our Facebook page, facebook.com/RetroGamersPodcast. On Instagram @RetroGamersPodcast. And geez, I don't even know where else. You can email us at email@theretrogamers.com if you wanna talk to us. Message us, email us. We respond generally quickly because we love talking to our fans. And Ant, you know what? I think this closes out another successful week. I think you got one more thing.
One last thing.
Yes.
Speaking of that, if you want to check us out on Facebook, it is just type in on a search the Yin and the Yang podcast. We have an email if you have any questions, comments, anything like that. And one day I do want to get you over to the Yin and the Yang podcast, and I want to do a really huge segment about martial arts games.
Ooh,
because
okay.
because a lot of our listeners have really emailed us and told us, we're gamers too, and they listen to this show.
I will happily come over and talk about it. I'm sure Larry will too.
Crossover.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So yin and yang podcast @gmail.com is where you can reach us.
Very nice. All right, Ant, and I think that's that just about does it. So from all of us here at the Retro Gamers and from the Anthony Chu at the Yin and the Yang podcast, thank you so much for listening or watching, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.